Welcome back to artofdino.com and saveearth.us, and I have found a ridiculous article today that it's kind of, I've been leading towards it with synchronicities left and right about kind of just coming across these different methods of burial that were amongst the Tartars, the Tibetans, and a lot of different things. And then I came across this article from the Evening Star, Washington, D.C., Saturday, January 16th, 1892, called Burying the Dead, Curious Methods Adopted by Various Peoples for Mortuary Purposes. Queer Kinds of Mummies, the Art of Embalming from Ancient Times Until Now, How Nature Does It, Burying in the Air, in the Water, and Living Sepulchres, the Famous Towers of Silence. So I found a couple articles that I was like, oh, that's perfect for a video. And then I found this big one that had a lot of them, the other articles combined. So this is the one I'm going to read. And this is, again, just kind of an interesting take on all of these different things, because it's one way to find out how different people are connected throughout the world is by their interesting means of burials, because you're not going to find two really completely random ways of burials from two completely different tribes. Like, usually they kind of tend to follow each other and follow these kind of patterns and these type of ceremonies because they travel. And we know that back in the day, even though they told us that people weren't traveling all over the place, we know that at one point they definitely were. And customs and Egyptian artifacts and things, are different products of China, are found all over the place. So you have to just really kind of look at it from different perspectives, and this is one very interesting perspective, and it's how they kind of deal with the afterlife and the mortal shell as the spirit leaves. So very interesting things to take from this, and this is a pretty big one, so it will be a pretty big video, and I will put some AI art up there because I don't want to draw 1,000 different things. It's much easier to just type it. So it also gives some cool vision. So let's go here. We're going to check out this from all over the world. This is quite a collection of things, and I've never heard of most of these. And again, it stems from me kind of seeing a video by Tibet Travel on the Tibetan way of burying people in the trees in these little kind of places, and then the wood rots, the body kind of rots, and then pretty soon there's like bones. It's very interesting, but that was a Tartar method. So you'll find out that and a lot more in this article. So let's just get right to it. So here we go. Among the horrors stored away in odd corners at the National Museum are a number of mummies of human beings, preserved by various means and in many shapes, some extended at length and others huddled up in curious fashions, with their knees under their chins and faces drawn into the most frightful grimaces. The majority of these mummies are of Aboriginal Americans from various parts of this continent, and doubtless many of them are of high antiquity. Several tribes of Indians in times past were accustomed to resort to such methods for the preservation of their dead. In the first ones it goes to are the Aleutian mummies, it looks like. What beliefs of theirs, religious or otherwise, gave rise to these practices can only be surmised. It is known that the ancient Egyptians entertained a notion that after a period of many thousands of years, the souls of the defunct returned into the same bodies in which they had lived, provided that the corpses remained free from corruption. Wow. For this reason they spared no pains in taking measures for rendering dead bodies incorruptible, and upon the tombs intended for their reception, every conceivable effort for securing solidity and permanence was expended. So again, keep into mind that this is American newspaper from D.C. in 1890s, and it's their impressions of what these things are. So when they say things like it's known that they entertain the notion, the Egyptians, that after thousands of years the souls would come back into the body, like that is something that, you know, you'd have to ask an ancient Egyptian, really. And I don't think anyone in this time period has preserved perfectly the exact kind of purpose for it. It could be something entirely different. So just keep all that stuff in mind. Here we go. Certain Indian customs. The Santi Indians of South Carolina are said to have preserved the remains of their dead by removing the flesh from the bones and keeping the latter carefully in a wooden box, every year oiling and cleansing them. Thus they conserved them for centuries, so that a savage might perhaps possess the skeletons of his progenitors for a number of generations. Surely no more precious heirloom can well be imagined. A different process was resorted to by certain tribes of Virginia and the Carolinas, which carefully slayed defunct persons, removing the flesh from the bones and finally sewing the latter up in the skins again. And again, they say that a lot of this isn't from antiquity, so that could mean, it's from the pre-reset, or again, they're just trying to pump out the idea that America was brand new and there's no such thing as ancient Americans. But we all know that that is not the case. So again, ignore that whole aspect of this. On the northwest coast, up to a comparatively recent period, the corpses of rich or distinguished persons among the Indians of the northwest coast were eviscerated, dried, placed in wrappings of fur and grass matting, and suspended above ground in some convenient rock shelter. Sometimes, however, a prepared body was placed in a lifelike position, dressed and seemingly engaged in some congenial occupation such as hunting, fishing, or sewing. With dead persons so treated were also placed effigies of the animals they were pursuing, the hunter being attired in his wooden armor and provided with an enormous mask ornamented with feathers. The weapons were merely facsimiles in wood of the articles represented. Interesting. The Ethiopians and their dead, and we know the Ethiopians are very ancient. There is something magic about the Ethiopians that we are clearly not being told, so again, keep that in mind. The father of history, Herodotus, gives a remarkable description of the manner in which the Ethiopians were accustomed to preserve their dead. According to his account, having dried the body, they plastered it over with gypsum and painted it so as to make it resemble life as nearly as possible. Then they put it within a hollow column made of crystal, which material they dug up in abundance. Thus enclosed, the corpse was kept in the house of its nearest surviving relations for a year, after which it was buried. It is not always to be readily determined whether a preserved body has been kept so by artifice or simply desiccated by natural causes. In dry climates, the latter often happens. For example, the cadavers of people who have been lost in Death Valley are perfectly mummified and dried to a shrunken blackness. Wow! Many tribes of Indians, even at the present day, bury their dead in hollow logs, which are made to serve as coffins instead of putting them underground. I wonder if that's how coffins came. Sometimes trees are split for this purpose, and the two halves are hollowed out to receive the body. It is known that the ancient people of Denmark were accustomed to employ hollow logs in like manner for mortuary purposes. Again, connection? Who knows? This is the time when they talk about Native Americans as just being like, exactly what we're taught in textbooks. Not much difference, but we know America was populated by something far different in the past, before that reset. Whatever happened. Covered with slabs of mortar. In the year 1821, a farmer named McDowell was plowing some land in North Carolina where the Cherokee had formerly dwelt. At a certain part of the field, his plow evoked a hollow rumbling sound, and by digging for the cause, a slab of burnt clay about 7 feet in length was uncovered. In the attempt to remove this, it was broken into several fragments. Nothing was found beneath it, but on examining its underside, there was discovered the mold of a naked human figure. Other similar slabs were subsequently come across bearing molds, one of which revealed the impress of a plump human arm, evidently that of a woman. Investigation brought to light the fact that the Indians had been accustomed to bury their dead by digging a pit and laying the corpse in it, face upward. Above the body was then spread a covering of mortar, and on this was built a hot fire, which baked the mortar and formed it into a pottery shield. Naturally, after the corpse had decayed, a perfect cast of it remained. Interesting. Many curious similarities are found between the burial customs of ancient Europeans and those of American Indians, because they were connected. The latter frequently placed food with the corpse and money in its mouth, just like the ancient Romans, who thus supplied a coin to pay Charon's fare for wafting the departed soul over the infernal river, the Styx, furnishing also a cake composed of flour and honey herewith to appease the fury of Cerberus at the gate of Hades. And again, how do we not know that any of this is based in truth? Like, this could be the cliff notes of what really happens and what they really believed, and which would be so much more engulfing and encompassing. So here we go. Tree burial. This is one I like. The Mosquito Indians of Central America inter their dead beneath the floors of their houses. Certain tribes on the northwest coast utilize as receptacles for corpses large wooden chests, which are usually placed on low platforms. Many of the red-skinned people of the west dispose of their cadavers by putting them in trees and upon high scaffolds, partly to keep them from being devoured by beasts, and partly also for the sake of exposing them advantageously to the mummifying effects of the dry air. Tree burial was not uncommon among the nations of antiquity. The ancient Tartars and Scythians enveloped their dead in sacks of skins and hung them to the trees. In some parts of Australia, the natives dispose of corpses by placing them on platforms and in trees so as to protect them from wild dogs, but the fact that ravens and other carrion-eating birds devour them does not seem to trouble the survivors in the least. It often happens that the traveler in that country is informed by the croaking of disturbed ravens that the body of a defunct Australian is lying in the branches over his head. Such aerial sepulchres are mostly erected for the bodies of old men who have died a natural death, but warriors who have fallen in battle are treated very differently. They are placed in a seated attitude upon a high platform, the legs crossed and the arms extended by means of sticks. The legs and arms are covered with zebra-like stripes of red, white, and yellow, and the weapons of the deceased persons are laid across his lap. Then fires are lighted under the platform and kept up for 10 days or more, during the whole of which time the friends and mourners remain by the body and are not permitted to speak. Sentinels relieve each other at appointed intervals, their duty being to see that the fires are not suffered to go out. Having been subjected to this prolonged smoking process, the body is rendered hard and mummy-like, so that wild dogs will not touch it. It remains sitting on the platform for 2 months or so and is then taken down and buried, with the exception of the skull, which is made into a drinking cup for the nearest relative. And again, that just made me think of, there's still more to come, but nowadays we just cremate, and God knows if they even give you the right dust anymore. I would be surprised if they don't. And it's becoming more and more of a less sacred and less important and just thing. It's like one of those things, again, that the modern controllers want out. They don't want people to do this the right way or to do it in any even respectful way, kind of. They kind of want it to be easier. They made it so expensive to do it a lot of other ways, and again, in America, it's just the sacredness of it is slowly slipping away. So here we go. Mourning observances. The cutting of hair as a mourning observance is of very great antiquity, and among the ancients whole cities and countries were shaved when a great man died. The Persians not only shave themselves on such occasion, but extend the same process to their domestic animals. Up to within a very few years, the Indians of Alaska were accustomed to express their grief for the death of any important personage by human sacrifices, and the same practice is largely followed in some parts of Africa. At the funerals of chiefs of the Florida and Carolina Indians in former times, all the wives of the defunct and his male relatives also were slain. That seems a little counterintuitive and could be a lie. I don't know. That doesn't seem like it would ever have a point. But you never know. In former times, nearly every tribe of Indians east of the Mississippi River was accustomed at regular periods to collect and clean the bones of those persons who had died during the intervening time, interring them in a common sepulchre lined with choice furs and marked with a mound of wood, stone, or earth. Such is the origin of those immense tumuli filled with the mortal remains of nations, which the antiquary finds in all parts of this country and is so fond of digging into with irreverent curiosity. According to a law enforced among some American Aborigines, a widow is always compelled to carry about with her for 4 years the bones of her dead husband enclosed in a casket. And that part when they were talking about kind of the groups of burials that were found all over the country with irreverent curiosity, I wonder if that is, that could be a hint of the past war and battle that was fought. Whatever happened here that took down this ancient master civilization that once probably covered America, the Rockies, the West, the Grand Canyon area, whatever took that down, there could be, that there was probably a massive war of some kind or some kind of natural disaster, but either way, there would be massive places where bodies would be buried, whether it was either one of those. So, again, they don't know. There's so much that they don't know. They kind of just came and they assumed stuff and were told stuff by other people, and then they continue to keep following it and never really thinking otherwise. So, again, keep all the options open out there in your minds. Don't totally believe everything, but you know what to do. Aquatic burials. This sounds pretty cool. Among the peoples of antiquity, the practice was not uncommon of disposing of the dead by throwing them into the sea, by sinking them in water courses, and by setting them afloat in boats. The ichthyophagy, or fish eaters, who lived in a region bordering on the Persian Gulf, are mentioned by Ptolemy as having the custom of invariably committing their corpses to the ocean, thus repaying the obligations they had incurred to its inhabitants. According to the same authority, the famous lotus eaters, when they found found themselves about to die threw themselves into the sea. The Cherokees of Tennessee formerly made a practice of throwing their dead into the rivers. In Africa, people of the tribe called Obongo take the cadaver to a running stream, which has been previously diverted from its course. A deep grave is dug in the bed of the stream, the body is placed in it and covered over, and finally the stream is restored to its natural course. That's kind of cool. History says that Alaric was buried in a similar manner in the year 410 AD at Cosenca in Calabria. The Goths turned aside the course of the river Vasento, and having made a grave in the midst of its bed, there interred their king with a prodigious amount of treasure. Then they turned the river back into its course and killed all persons who had been concerned in preparing the romantic sepulchre. They're just making rivers completely at their control for things like this. They're redistributing rivers. So again, there's no telling what the ancient people were capable of. They could move rivers, make canals, they could change the coastlines, they could do all this stuff, which we can't do. But we wish we could, or we can, but it takes so long. But they did it really easy and for small reasons back in the day. Skull Valley, which is a part of the Great Salt Lake Desert, gets its name from the number of skulls which have been found there, owing to the custom practiced by the Bitchute Indians of burying their dead in springs, sinking them with stones. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. Inasmuch as these springs are depended upon for water supply, the habit in question is not a particularly agreeable one. Very often people have been obliged to dig out the skeletons of Indians from the mud at the bottoms of springs in that country before using the water. And to me, again, reverse engineering that thought sounds to me like, again, there was a war, and in order to again ruin people when you're fighting a war with them, you want them to give up their land, you want them to leave the place that they're at, you want them to be weakened. You would poison their water supply with dead bodies. And so they claim here that it is a Indian tradition to do that, but why would Indians ever do that? It doesn't seem like a smart thing at all to put a dead body in a fresh water supply. That seems like something an enemy would do, and then it gets repurposed through history, lovely history, to fit the narrative. So again, cannibalistic practices. The Tartars, the good old Tartars of old. And again, is this conspiracy? Is this true? Is this reality? Or is this the propaganda? The Tartars of old are said to have made a practice of eating their dead, strangling the aged for this purpose when they were thought to have survived the period of their usefulness otherwise. That sounds like something you'd say to people you want to make enemies of your people. But here we go. It has been affirmed that the ancient Irish and Britons devoured the defunct, esteeming this mode of disposal more honorable than any other. Up to the present day, the same custom is known to be followed by many tribes in Africa, particularly by the Fans, who number millions, but this plan is adopted only with common people, kings, and chiefs being buried with much ceremony. The Timber Indians used to bury their dead in a very curious way, selecting for the purpose living sepulchres. They left the corpses of defunct persons to be devoured by beasts or birds of prey. Tibetans do that too. They have a certain place where they let the vultures come and just pick at the bones, and then they fly away. A similar custom is said to have been followed by the ancient Persians, who threw out the bodies of their dead on the roads. If they were promptly devoured by wild beasts, it was considered very honorable and altogether satisfactory. Otherwise, it was esteemed a misfortune. The Parthians and Medes pursued the same method in disposing of their dead, having a horror and aversion for the idea of corruption and decomposition. Interesting. Also, they entertained the notion that persons thus devoured by wild animals would not be entirely dead, but would enjoy at least a partial sort of life in the creatures which ate them. Probably it was for this reason that the Bactrians and Hyrcanians trained dogs for the same purpose, called sepulchral dogs, which received the greatest care and attention because it was deemed proper that the souls of the deceased should have strong and healthy frames to dwell in. Dr. H.C. Yarrow gives a wonderful description of the famous Towers of Silence, in which the Parsis of India bury their dead. These towers are erected on the top of Malabar Hill in Bombay and are approached by a road which is barred by strong iron gates against all except Parsis. The garden is beautifully kept and filled with flowering shrubs and palm trees. 5 in number are the towers, built of black granite, about 40 feet in diameter and 25 feet high in height. The oldest and smallest of them was built about 200 years ago when the Parsis first settled in Bombay and is used only for a certain family. A 6th tower of square shape stands alone and is only used for criminals. Though wholly destitute of ornament, the parapet of each tower possesses an extraordinary coping, which instantly attracts and fascinates the gaze. It is a coping formed not of stone, but of living vultures. These birds are ordinarily seen ranged side by side in perfect order and in a complete circle around the parapet of each tower, with their heads pointing inward. So motionless are they while resting from their hideous banquets that they might be imagined to be carved out of the stonework. Within the parapet of each tower is a sort of floor divided into 72 compartments with a well in the middle. These compartments are arranged in concentric rings separated from each other by narrow ridges of stone, which are grooved so as to act as channels for conveying all moisture from the receptacles into the well into the drains below. No one is allowed to enter the towers except the corpse bearers, nor is anyone permitted within 30 feet of the immediate precincts. On a typical Parsi funeral, Mr. Monier Williams writes as follows: "While engaged in conversation near the towers, a sudden stir among the vultures made us raise our heads. At least 100 birds collected around one of the towers began to show symptoms of excitement, while others swooped down from neighboring trees. The cause of this sudden abandonment of their previous apathy soon revealed itself. A funeral was seen approaching. However distant the house of a deceased person, whether rich or poor, the body is always carried to the towers by the official corpse bearers, the mourners walking behind. The funeral I witnessed was that of a child. The body was wrapped in a white sheet and placed in a metal trough. When the two corpse bearers reached the path leading by a steep incline to the door of the tower, the mourners turned back and entered one of the prayer houses. The two bearers unlocked the door of the tower, reverently conveyed the body of the child into the interior, and unseen by anyone, laid it uncovered in one of the stone receptacles nearest the central well. In the outermost circle of the stone receptacles are placed the bodies of males, in the middle circle those of females, and in the inner circle nearest the well those of children. Presently the bearers reappeared with the empty trough and white cloth, and scarcely had they closed the door when a dozen vultures swooped down upon the body, rapidly followed by others. In 5 minutes more, we saw the satiated birds fly back and lazily settle down upon the parapet. They had left nothing behind but a skeleton. In a fortnight or so the bearers returned, and with gloved hands and implements resembling tongs, placed the dry skeleton in the central water. There the bones find their last resting place, and there the dust of many generations of Parsis, commingling, is left undisturbed for centuries." Wow. Although from the European point of view this method of burying the dead seems so extremely horrible, the Parsis look upon it in a way quite opposite. They say that the plan was devised by their prophet Zoroaster, who lived 6,000 years ago. He was the greatest of health officers and conceived the system to be the one best adapted for getting rid of the decaying remains of human beings, in order that they might not contaminate the earth and be a source of danger to survivors. In a sanitary point of view, they assert nothing can be more perfect, since even the rainwater which washes the bones is conducted by channels into beds of purifying charcoal. Wow, that actually is kind of a genius idea. These people are wild. This world is nuts, and it tells a lot about about a culture, about everything from their belief in these things. And there must be, if this realm goes as far as I think it is, there must be millions of different ways to bury the dead. And I wonder what the common thing, like if we could go beyond the realm and examine even more of these different traditions from places, people we've never even heard of and beings we never heard of. What else would we find? What would be the ultimate one? What would be the true way? Because this is a question I always ask, how I would want to be buried, because I would not want to be cremated. And I've thought of a bunch of different reasons in the past and different methods, but which aren't mentioned here, which maybe I'll talk about one day. But these ones are just wild. And you can tell a lot, again, about Tartars in America and the Native Americans being, renamed so that to throw everyone off their scent in the historical sense. And so there's so much. It's really crazy, because every culture has a different belief of the afterlife, reincarnation, what happens at death, these ultimate mysteries that, we may never find the answer to. And you can tell a lot about a culture and a civilization by how they treat this, and if it's reverent, if it's, really sacred, how sacred, and there's so many different modalities of it, and it's a massive spectrum of mourning and different grief. And then there's a whole spectrum of how the person was. Were they a hero? Were they a criminal? Were they, all these different things factor in. And who's right? I have no idea. But I find this all very interesting, and it again, it leads to a lot of different things. A lot of different realizations can occur, and I believe if we just, again, keep digging, you'd find even more methods of the burial and more answers to these questions of why a lot of these things happened and why these certain places are found. But it's all, not all lost, but it's going to be tough to piece it together. So we've got a lot of work to do. Either way, I wish you all very amazingly long lives. I hope everyone strives for longevity, because it's just, this place is a miracle and a blessing. Life is perfect and beautiful, and I have a feeling the afterlife is too. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the bottom. And share your comments, share this video if you'd like, and check out artofdino.com and saveearth.us. Again, you all are great. Bless you all. Thank you.